And a little bit. Okay, thank you.
Right.
It's nice,
Thanks, Derek. Right.
nice to be back giving a talk to Liver North. Liver North's always been very, very close to my heart and good to me. So, and as John said, I'm the medical director of NHS BT organs, tissues, transplantation, and donation. Um, and so this talk is about uh, a potential initiative which is called the Assessment and Recovery Centres, and I'll explain to you what that is soon. So, just as a bit of a background, the demand for organs across the UK is increasing significantly, and the problem is that the eligible donor pool, the people that end up in intensive care and ultimately donate organs, is declining, and particularly since COVID, the change in practice means that a lot of patients don't get to ICU, and a lot of end of life care is delivered outside of intensive care, and um, there's a significant inequity of access to organ transplantation across the country, depending on what socioeconomic group you're in, where you live, what your ethnicity is. And at the same time, the NHS, as you know, is struggling with with finances and the growing costs of keeping people alive, and all the new treatments is a problem. This is just the current waiting list. So this is 13th of January this year. So it's just the other day. So there were 11,881 patients waiting for transplant across the board, all organ transplants. The darker blue are the suspended patients, and 3,000, nearly 4,000 patients are
You're
suspended.
not on that slide, Derek. You're still on the innovation one.
Hmm. Uh, Maybe I'll just.
That's it.
I'll leave it at that. Okay, so you can see that the 11,881 patients are waiting for a transplant. 4,000 are suspended, and people can be suspended for a number of reasons, mostly medical, but some particularly kidney patients. When they start dialysis, some of them get suspended before they get on dialysis to accrue points. So it's quite difficult to interpret. If you look at if you just look at go down the list and get to liver, currently this is the current figures. We've done 631 liver transplants in this financial year so far, which is from April last year. Last year at this time we did 638, so we're about the same, down slightly. Um, One of the things that has changed significantly is that we've moved from having donors that are brain dead, and I'm sure you all know about brain death. Brain death has been the diagnosis of brain death has been around since the late 70s and early 80s. Um, but a lot of patients who get into intensive care aren't eligible for brainstem death testing. And as you can see, if you look at these bars, the blue bar are the donors that are brain dead. The light blue bar are the donors that are called donation after cardiac death, and they are very different donors and significantly more risky organs because obviously there's no blood flow at the time the organs are taken. So it does present a challenge to making sure the outcome is the same. You can see on the side here that the median donor age is now 53, which is, and that's median, which means that some of the donors we're seeing now are well in their 70s. Um, and this is just showing you the change in the donor demographic. So, 10 years ago, most of our donors were young. They were almost all DBD donors, so brain dead donors. We would exclude obese donors. We'd make sure that the donors have minimal comorbidity, which means they wouldn't have lots of other illnesses. very more commonly traumatic death, fewer smokers, and fewer donors who had infections. But now, actually, that's completely changed. So a lot of the donors are older, mostly are DCD. We have lots of obese donors, and there's patients with lots of comorbidity, particularly, heart disease, kidney disease, and lots of infections. And since COVID, we still have quite a few donors who present to us with a positive COVID test. So they are very different, and it is the challenge of how to get the best out of these donors. The other thing that we are dealing with, obviously, I said the waiting list. There's a significant gap now between the need and the organs we can transplant. You can see that this one is kidney, and significant gap. This is about workforce. You can't see very much of the graph, but just to show you that there's a huge variation across the units with workforce. And then if you look here, you can see that actually the number of organs that are being used was starting to decrease before our initiative, which was about improving organ utilization. The other thing that was worrying before we started the organ utilization program was the fact that actually there were lots of organs declined, and you can see this funnel plot here shows the different liver transplant centers, and you can see that actually there's a huge variation in the number of organs being used. Newcastle's way up here, largely because the waiting list is so small. So we have the smallest waiting list in the country, and so we've always been able to be a bit more selective about the donors we accept. Whereas if you go to Birmingham, down here, which is the biggest waiting list in the country, nearly 240 patients waiting, they tend to use as many organs as they can. And this is a slide which is very worrying, and this is about the median waiting time to get an organ. And you can see these are the this is kidney transplant, but you can see the huge variation from Leeds down here, where patients can wait 300 days, to Sheffield up here, where they can wait nearly 900 days. And we really need to tackle that, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And the other problem is ethnicity. So if you're white, then you will wait significantly shorter time than if you're black or Asian, and that definitely needs to change. One of the big problems we're facing is donor consent rates or family consent rates, and you can see here that amongst the white population, the consent rate was actually quite good up till 2020, especially during COVID. The consent rate was good, 71%. Amongst Asian and black patients and families, far less. And that's a problem which has been really difficult to tackle, and it's a problem we've had for 20 years. And it's not just a UK problem, it's worldwide. And partly it's due to culture, partly due to religion. But since 2020, our consent rate has dropped. So during COVID, everyone loved the NHS and thought we were doing a brilliant job. And then after COVID, they all hated us. So the consent rate is now dropped to just under 60%, which is a significant drop. And then we have a lot of patients now dying on the waiting list. I won't go through that. But the big problem we see is this gap between the organs being utilized. So these are brain dead donors on the left, and you can see that liver and kidney have good utilization. So if you've got brain death, then the organs are being used. Liver 77% are being used, and kidneys 83%. But once you become a DCD donor, you can see the huge difference. Livers go down to 32%. So we had to tackle that. The other thing that was concerning is the number of organs that weren't being used. So 13% of kidneys get discarded, 21% of livers get discarded, lots of pancreases because there aren't that many people waiting, hearts and lungs. So all those kind of things needed to be addressed. The UK has always been a leader in transplantation and transplant innovation for since the early 60s all the way up. We've innovated all the way through, and then once we've innovated, actually implementing it and making it become the standard of care or business as usual becomes difficult because of the lack of funding, which has always been our gripe. I don't know, I'm sure you know that this report was published. It's called the OUG report, which is the Organ Utilization Group. Basically, we went around the country looking at what patients wanted from organ transplantation, how much risk they're prepared to take, and how much risk they expected their clinicians to take. And they produced a recommendation. I'm not going to go through all this because the whole talk in itself. But one of the recommendations was this recommendation was to embed innovation, support new techniques and technologies that are evidence-based. And I'm sure you've heard, and I know that someone's given you a talk about machine perfusion, but what's happened over the last 5 years has been a revolution in the way we preserve organs. So in the old days, that was what we did most of the time. You put an organ in a box of ice. It had lots of complications and lots of risk to it, and the quality of the organs would deteriorate, particularly if they were extended criteria donors, in other words, donors who were high risk. What happened was a number of machines have been developed over time. This machine here, which is called a normothermic reperfusion machine, it's basically a cardiac bypass machine. And it goes to it gets taken to the donor hospital, and the donor that is a non-brain dead donor, a calculated death donor, gets put on this machine and essentially gets their circulation restarted. They don't get their heart restarted because the machine does the work, and they don't get their brain perfused. So because that is illegal. So that is called NRP. Once the organs are retrieved at this point, then you can do a number of things with them. You can take them back to the center and recondition them. This machine here, which we use in Newcastle as a standard now for all DCD liver transplants, is called an ex vivo liver assist machine, and the liver gets put on that and made to work on the machine. Or you can use this machine, which is called an OrganOx. This one is cold at the top, this one is warm. In other words, the bottom one has blood going through it, the top one has a preservation solution going through it. And so that's what's become standard of care. And so these are all the machines that are available. This normothermic machine, the OrganOx. This is NRP. We have one for the lung. We have the cold machine for the liver, which we use in Newcastle. We have one for a kidney. And then there's a kidney machine without oxygen. The important things about these machines, they all give the organs oxygen. And you can see that kidney looks absolutely beautiful on that machine, and it looks like it's working in the body. And so these are all the options available: cold, oxygenated or not, and perfusion, either as a transport device or not. You can transport them in that device as well. I won't go through that. So a lot of research has been done, and it's shown that actually this makes a very big difference to the utilization, and that the discard rate of if we stick to the liver, the discard rate of the liver is much less. So if you use NRP and machine perfusion, the discard rate goes down significantly. So 32% of DCD livers would be used without the machine, and if you add the machines to it, it goes up to 68%. And that's where we are at the moment. That's just more research. And you can see, if you look down, forget all that, but if you look down the bottom here, so far this is the most up-to-date information. We've perfused 511 livers. These are all the centers. All the centers are doing it. And you see Newcastle, we've perfused 52, which is about 10% of all the liver transplants done. Now, one of the problems with this is it costs a lot of money. It costs money for the disposables, for all the tubing. It costs money for the solutions, sorry, and it costs money for the machines. It also costs money to have staff 24/7 being available to do this. And therein lies the problem. So 511 livers have been perfused from 2022 to 2025. And we've done, on average, 900 livers a year. So you can see that the vast minority have been perfused. And so that needs to change. And how would we do that? And I'll come to that now. One of the other things that you can do on the machine is you can do what's called repair. You can repair the organs, and there's lots of ways to do this. This is some work done in Newcastle looking at using gene editing on the machine. You can use stem cells on the machine, put them into the liver to regenerate them. You can remove the fat. This is a defatting drug that can be used, and also you can change the blood group. And this is Mike Nicholson from Cambridge, and I'm sure you saw in the news that actually you can turn all organs, almost all organs, into a blood group O. Now that's still in process, but those are things you can do. Just a few things you can do. So how can we make this sustainable and available for everyone in every center? So any patient on a liver transplant, wherever you are, should be able to get this treatment, and the livers they get should be able to be treated in the same way. Now, what the Americans have done is they've created what's called organ recovery centers. So essentially what happens is the organ donor is moved to these specialized centers. And there are 52 across the United States. Now, there's 140 liver transplant centers in the United States. They have about 20,000 patients on their waiting list, and they've created these organ recovery centers, which are specialized donor care centers where the donor is taken to the center, the liver is retrieved. It's then, depending on what state the donor's in, the liver will be put on a machine and will be regenerated and remade to work, and you can assess the organ. The problem with this model in the United Kingdom is that a lot of our donors are DCDs, and for DCD donor, I'm not sure you know, but the family will stay with the donor until treatment withdrawal. And that would be difficult if you're moving the donor 200 miles to an organ recovery center for the family to go with the donor. And so we felt that it's probably not a model that we could operationalize. But we did think we could consider doing this, having a model which is called an ARC. And there's my little picture of an ARC, which is an assessment and recovery center. So to create assessment and recovery centers where the organ moves and not the donor. And this was something which came as a recommendation in the OUG report. Now, the benefit of having organ recovery centers is that you'd increase utilization, and in particular for the heart, which is probably the lowest utilization in the world now. And don't forget, heart transplant in the United Kingdom, other than South Africa, was really innovative in the 60s. And, we were way ahead in places, in Papworth. And now we're probably the worst in the world. Lung utilization, again, is also very low. DCD livers, that will also improve, and supply and demand of kidneys will improve. So what we've worked out and modeled is that if you have 24-hour service in these centers, then what you'd do is you'd increase the organ offering and utilization by 48%. You'd have additional transplants per year, a huge number, and you'd have cost benefit. And so this model, we engaged with Toronto. Toronto has been using this model for lung transplant for a number of years now. And they've gone from having very few lung transplants 10 years ago to probably the biggest lung transplant program in the world. And we followed their model. And so this is be the donor hospital. The organ is retrieved. It gets taken to this recovery center, and then once the organ has been assessed, it's been on a machine. It's gone through a whole lot of tests, which I won't bore you with, but there's lots and lots of research has been done on how you assess the organ. Once that we know the organ is transplantable, it will go to the recipient in the recipient hospital. There are lots of things we've had to work out of how we accept the organ, where you accept it. Do you accept it before it goes to the center, or do you accept it afterwards? But these are the other countries that have followed suit. So there are other organ recovery centers around the world. We've agreed now that and this is part of the pitch we made to the Department of Health, was that actually we need these physical arcs, and we agreed that we'd have 2 or 3. We haven't agreed the exact number because we're waiting for the money, basically. There's lots of things you would need in an arc, and what we're working through is when will the organ be accepted, what machine perfusion will be used. The regulation and licensing is really important because it will be a center that needs to be governed, and then the logistics of transporting the organ. At the moment, we spend in the region of 20 million pounds a year transporting organs around the country, and lots of that is flights. And you may not know, but actually getting flights in this country after hours is almost impossible. It's just horrendous. So we have a transport provider that has 2 planes, but if you have 5 donors and 6 organs or 10 organs that need to fly, you end up having to get planes from Europe, which cost a significant amount of money. Basically, the evidence is pretty strong now with liver transplant that if you do this, it's pretty transformative. You can end up transplanting and utilizing far more livers than we currently do. You'd focus expertise in the centers, so that you don't each transplanting center doesn't have to rely on a 24-hour rota, which will cost lots of money. They don't have to rely on buying the machinery themselves and buying the disposables. And every patient would have the same opportunity. This is just an example of what would happen, for example, with the lung being transported. There are lots of other benefits, and we've looked at patient and family benefits, clinical benefits, health system benefits, social benefits, environmental benefits, and we've produced a business case to the Department of Health, and that business case is quite significant. So the cost is at the moment for developing 2 arcs is 10 million pounds a year for the next 5 years. If we go to 3 arcs, it'll be 15 million pounds a year. That business case has been put in, but actually the money we save the NHS, because you'll transport more people, you'll use less dialysis, you'll have fewer liver patients on a waiting list that are deteriorating, that cost a lot of money. The problem at the moment with transplant is there's a price that is paid by NHS England for the transplant procedure, but the cost of keeping people alive on a transplant list or managing their chronic liver disease, those costs are much greater than the price we get to do the transplant. And having more patients transplanted earlier would reduce those costs. And we've looked at all that. In fact, we've got a lot of cost-benefit analysis done. So the plan is to have these centers up and running as by 2025. I think this is the timeline. By 2029, that we'd have all these 3 centers up and running, and we'd have an additional 750 transplants across the board. So that's the plan. We're hoping to get the money from NHS England. I think that's it. We can stop sharing. We're hoping to get the money. Um, we're waiting to hear about about the funding. We suspect they'll give us part of the money. And the problem with that is then in which parts of this program do you fund? If you don't get all the money, then what do you do with it? And the plan B is that each centre will be supported with some of that money to actually become much more sustainable and resilient in doing this uh, perfusion. So each centre will be their own arc, but that's not what I want because that's the problem with that is you can't sustain that. There's just not enough people around to do that, and so that's the plan, and that's the organ and recovery centres.
Brilliant. I don't know how we can help, of course, but at least we can spread the word. It's a pity you didn't know any good footballers because they're all billionaires. Um,
Well, we are engaging with industry.
yes,
Um,
yes,
and so we've got some companies. There's a company called Eurofins, very big company, and they're very keen to engage with us. So within the arc, there's going to be an area where you do the business as usual. You take the liver, you put on a machine, and you do all the measurements. There'll be an area for research because it has to have a research facility, and there'll be an area for R&D. So if we say to companies, okay, if you invest in this with us, then there'll be some benefit for you because a lot of the pharma companies need livers to actually trial their drugs on, and rather than using patients who can be hurt by these drugs that they're unsure about, if you put the liver on a machine and then you infuse the drugs into the liver, you can test the effects of the drug on the liver rather than in a patient. So I think there's a potential that they will go for that. I have a meeting with Eurofins actually on the 28th, so I'm
brilliant. Oh,
looking
well,
forward
good.
to that.
Good luck with that. I'll ask some questions and then hand over to the rest. I may ask the questions you're wanting to ask, so I'll do it first, and then that'll get that sorted. The first one I was thinking of. There's seems to be no standardization across the country, and obviously that's your job to try and get some standardization into it. You know, there's some places are doing a lot more than others, and some places have longer waiting lists, and and I know it must be impossible to do anything about that. But that's not the question. What I was going to ask was what's happening with the living donor, and the success rates from that.
Oh, well, that's a totally different talk. But so the other thing that when I took over, we did one of the things I wanted was to make sure that we actually had a sustainable living donor program in in this country. And we have a fantastic kidney living donor program.
Yeah,
I mean, it's one of the best in the world. And yet, for liver transplant, we zero point 0.4 per million of the population undergo living donor liver transplantation.
yeah,
And so what we've done with that is we've got a national proctor program. So we have a proctor team,
yeah.
and they proctor the centres who offer living donation to their patients. So every centre has to offer living donation as an option, so that patients have the opportunity to consider it. It's living donation is very safe. I mean, there was a time when everyone, the main problem was safety and death of the donor. But by creating the proctor team, who are a very experienced team, they're mostly the leads team, which have done lots of they've done over 200 living donors now.
Hmm. Hmm.
They, the proctor team, and the surgeons from there will go to the centres and do the cases with the surgeons in the local centres and teach them. And the safety is ensured. It's the mortality for donors now is under 0.5%. So we've done so we started the program. It went live after all the governance and stuff. Went live in September last year. Um, I think we've had 19 referrals now, We've transplanted 2 patients. There's another one coming up, which is about right. It's one transplant for every 4 donors assessed. That's about right. So that's progressing, and I managed to get money from NHS England to support the Proctor team. Newcastle is the only centre that hasn't referred anyone.
No, and it's a shame because we were the ones who did the public vote and got, an
Exactly.
overwhelming majority in favour.
And I think it's the way it's framed to the patients by the coordinators, I have to say. So, if you're a patient sitting in the clinic and you're saying, well, these are the options. You have a DCD, a DVD, half a liver, but there's also living donation. We've never done one.
No.
What do you think the patients are going to say? Well, if you've never
Yeah,
done one,
no.
I don't want to do it.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
waiting for a referral, Derek. As the independent assessor, I'm happy to do one.
Yeah, and we've got a meeting with the Newcastle team actually next week to say, get your finger out.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we know about the proctors and how they're selected and that. The other question was I picked up when you were talking about perfusion because we had Colin Wilson was the one who did all the perfusion talks for us, and the brain isn't perfused. Is that because consciousness can return?
Well, it's not that consciousness can return. It's against the code of practice to perfuse the brain after someone's died.
Yeah, but why is it?
The risk that well there have been 2 cases ever in the world where someone was thought to be brain dead and then woke up.
Ah,
But once you go into NLP, there's no way you're going to wake up. It's just not going to happen. But it's just illegal to perfuse the brain. You can't do that. So you have to ensure that the brain's not perfused, and we have ways of doing that to make sure that doesn't
yeah,
happen.
yeah. Okay, and the last question from me was you're talking about the age um, of donors.
Hmm.
What's the age of recipients? Do you know? Have you got any?
Well, for recipients, for liver recipients, the 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 highest age that the oldest we've done is 85. But the median age for liver recipients is also about 59, around
Right.
about 59.
Yeah, because I mean that's you don't usually have a liver problem till you get on a little bit.
Well, it depends on what disease you have.
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
PSC, you can be very young and get PSC. You can have, people between 20 and 40 can have fatty liver disease and
Oh yeah,
HCC.
yeah.
There's lots of
And
things.
more and more now. So right. Any other questions? Can you put your hand up or your imitation hand, your cartoon hand up?
Mm.
Any questions? Anyone? Yvonne. That's it, Yvonne.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks, Professor Manners. Thank you. One of your first screens had on, it sort of hit me. It said less than resilient workforce,
Yeah.
and that sort of struck me, because obviously the word resilience means a lot. I just wondered, is it just years of sort of lack of financial investment or resourcing, or is it something more than that, Professor?
So, in order to be resilient, you need to identify the problem, understand what you need to do to fix it. You need to be agile. In other words, like we were with COVID, during COVID, we were very resilient. We changed things quickly. We made decisions quickly. We got regulation through within a week. So you got to be agile, and then you got to be able to make your own decisions. And the problem with the NHS is that if we as clinicians want to make a change or a decision, you have to go up the chain, and it can take months and months and months to change anything. And so the reason we're not resilient is because we don't have that ability. If you go to the US, they make the decision, they control their money, they they do what they need to do. We don't. The clinicians in this country don't control the money at all. The money gets put into a pot and it goes to wherever the hospital wants it to go to. So that's why there's no resilience. The workforce is not sustainable because we don't have enough people. It's an aging workforce. No one wants to do transplant because there's no private practice. The hours are completely appalling. You know, you look at young people who come into medicine, the last thing they want to do is do what we did. You know, we just don't have enough of a workforce to be sustainable. That's one of the problems. And also, these organ perfusion devices are very labor intensive. So if you're going to get surgeons to spend all their hours putting organs on machines and watching, you have to sit with it. You can't just leave it. Someone has to be there all the time. So the point about the ARCs is you can develop a perfusion workforce that is made up of anesthetic staff, ODAs, nurses, people with science degrees, physician's assistants. You don't need surgeons to do it if you're in an environment where it's well governed, it's well controlled, and there's someone in charge of it. So, whereas in a hospital, it's impossible because you have to have someone on call every day. You know, Monday to Monday, 24 hours, and you can't sustain those rotas. It just doesn't. We don't have the people.
So how do we influence the people making the decisions? You know, I've been involved with a lot of research projects, and quite often the people who are in charge of the projects who are they're preaching to the converted, but never in any of these projects do I see anyone from the sort of the bureaucratic, if you like, or the side of the NHS. Do you know what I mean? Any of the managers or the people who are in charge of commissioning and things such as that. How do
We do.
you
No,
influence them?
I think research is a little bit different because research has a lot of research governance around it. There's funding that comes from NHR or from the MRC. That is really well governed and well controlled, and you apply for it, and that's a different thing. This service development, because this is service development, it's not research. The problem with service development is that you have to have someone has to commission it. Now, the commissioners currently are NHS England, and the NHS England don't have the workforce to be able to to commission all this at the moment. We have lots of close ties with NHS England, and the ultimate aim is for us as NHS BT to commission this because we think it's part of retrieval service. So I think you talk about managers. Our managers in NHS BT are very much more agile than the Department of Health or NHS England because transplant is their business. Whereas NHS England, they got a budget of 11 billion pounds, and they cover the whole of the NHS. They have to cover all specialist services. They have 60 highly specialised services that they manage. Transplant is just one of them.
Thanks, Bill.
That's good. Erica? Can you, I think you're muted, Erica.
You're on mute.
Apologies for that. It sounds very exciting and it all seems to make a lot of sense what you've said. If it does go to plan, if it does, which hopefully it will, there's obviously another 5 years in the wait until this is in action. Why is it as high as 22% of such as livers that are not being used at the moment? Why is it as high as that when there's so many on the list?
So I mean, the utilization of an organ there's a huge number of reasons why organs are not being used. One, the most common reason is donor criteria. So we part of NHSBT's role is to characterize the donor, and characterization involves lots of tests. The ones that really become the watershed are infections. So a lot of donors will have positive infections. So you have HIV, hepatitis C. There's a virus called HHVH, which has become a big problem, and that leads in liver patients to death very often. There's donors who are infected and you wouldn't never use their organs. There are lots of reasons why. And then the most important one is function. So if the liver's not functioning well, even if you put on a machine, it doesn't function, you have to discard it.
So it's down to the quality of that, the
Yeah,
condition of the
it's the
liver, not
quality. Yeah.
not the facilities or
No. So
available.
any patient who doesn't get transplanted because of logistical reasons in a trust, in a transplanting center,
Yeah.
I will be notified, and then the patient has to be sent a letter of candor, duty of candor, to say we didn't do your liver because we didn't have enough nurses, or whatever. They have to be notified that that's happened. The numbers of logistical reasons now is much lower because actually you can take a liver, put it on a machine, and let it stay on the machine for hours until you can get the nurses in or the theatres. So those logistic reasons are very low now. So mostly it's because of either donor criteria or because the liver quality is not good enough.
Right. Thank you.
It's awful, isn't it? Right, Michael.
Yeah. Professor Manners, thank you for your talk. Really, really interesting as always. But can I just ask the numbers of transplants undertaken last year and this year about the same? I think it was about 630 in a year. If there were more livers available, would there be the capacity within the system to allow more transplantations to take place? So in other words, it's linked to sort of resilience and availability of skilled, willing, able surgeons and support team to actually undertake the work. But would there be that capacity to actually carry out more work within the existing system?
Yeah. So there's a break point at which at some point, if we're getting more and more organs, there will be a point at which actually the resilience starts to fall apart and there's not enough sustainability. But at the levels we're at now, there is more than enough capacity. When we modeled it before, when we thought we were going to get all these hundreds more organs, there is a level at which it becomes a problem. One of the things that we discussed when we said, okay, the ARCs are going to allow us to do 750 more transplants over 5 years, is would that break the system? Would there be enough people to do it? And the point about the ARC is that it's an ARC, so you can keep the organs there until the facilities are available, and they will be there with people who know how to manage them and look after them. So whereas you can't do that in every trust because it takes up a space in recovery, so that a patient with a cancer can't be done because the liver's sitting in the space. Whereas in an ARC, that's not a problem. So, but there is a break point. You're right, and we've got to be careful about how we manage that. But at the moment, it's not a problem.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Excellent. Anyone else? No? That's good. Well, thank you so much, Derek. That was
Pleasure.
more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
But I think I'm not alone in that. Brilliant. Anyway, we'll spread the word and help any way we can, because we're on
Great.
lots of committees and things, and that's it. I'll stop recording now.